There is a building in Northeast Portland that most people have walked past 100 times without ever really seeing. It sits on the corner of a block that time seems to have forgotten, wedged between a dry cleaner and a vacant lot with a chain link fence. From a distance, if you are driving and you catch it at the wrong angle, you might think it is a church, or maybe a courthouse, something official, something old, something that belongs to another century entirely, which in fact it does. Two towers rise from either end of the structure, built from gray granite cut from quarries in the Columbia River Gorge, each tower standing nearly 90 feet above the street. The stone is dark with age, streaked with the particular shade of black that Pacific Northwest rain leaves on everything it touches long enough. Between the towers, the main facade runs half a city block, its windows cut in Gothic arches, its walls nearly 3 feet thick. At the roofline, the stone is shaped into crenellations, the same kind of notched pattern you see in the walls of medieval castles, because the man who designed this building in 1891 was not building a warehouse. He was building a fortress, the Portland Guard Armory. Constructed in the last decade of the 19th century to house the Oregon National Guard, its weapons, its horses, its drill floor, its ambitions. The building survived 2 world wars, a depression, several earthquakes, and the slow erasure of the neighborhood around it. It watched saloons become gas stations and gas stations become parking lots. It outlasted the streetcar lines and the timber money and 3 different administrations of city planners who drew lines on maps that never quite reached its walls. By the time the Guard moved to newer facilities in 1987, the building had been standing for 96 years. It was sold to a private owner for less than the cost of the timber that had once filled its drill floor. For a decade, it sat mostly empty, used occasionally for storage, occasionally for nothing at all. In 1999, a company out of Beaverton bought it, installed interior walls and roll-up metal doors in the old horse stalls and equipment bays, and opened it as Multnomah Armory Self-Storage. Units from $79 a month. There is a small sign near the iron gate, modest enough that you could walk past it a dozen times and miss it. The gate itself is old iron painted black, mounted between 2 stone pillars that once held the original wooden doors of the armory entrance. The keypad next to it is the only thing that looks like it belongs to the current century. On a Tuesday night in October of 2022, just before 9:45 in the evening, a woman in a gray hoodie walked up to that keypad, punched in a 6-digit code, and waited for the gate to swing open. She was 22 years old. She was carrying a canvas bag with a change of clothes and a foam pad rolled under her arm. She had worked a 10-hour shift at a warehouse 14 miles east of the city, and she had exactly nowhere to sleep that night, except for the 12-foot by 15-foot stone room she had been renting for $89 a month to store things she could not bear to leave behind. Her name was Vera Dunmore. She did not know, standing at that gate in the October rain, that she would not leave this building as her home for 26 months. She did not know a great many things that night. She knew how to work hard. She had been doing it since she was 15. She knew how to keep her head down in her complaints to herself, which was something Medford, Oregon had taught her early and thoroughly. She knew how to calculate what she could and could not afford, and she knew that the calculations she had been running for the past 4 months kept coming up the same answer no matter how many times she tried to find a different one. She did not know yet what she was walking into when that gate swung open, but she walked in anyway. Vera grew up in Medford, Southern Oregon high desert country, the Cascade Range on one side and the Siskiyous on the other, a town that gets hot in summer and cold in winter, and exists in a particular limbo between the liberal politics of the Willamette Valley and the conservative timber culture of rural Douglas County. It is the kind of place that produces people who are either very determined to leave or completely content to stay, and very rarely anything in between. Her mother, Linda Dunmore, worked dispatch for a regional trucking company. Not the romantic kind of trucking, not long hauls and open roads. The unglamorous kind. Scheduling paperwork phone calls at 2 a.m. when a driver broke down outside of Klamath Falls. Linda was good at her job, and she worked it for 17 years. She was also the kind of woman who never talked about money in front of her children in specific terms, which meant Vera understood from a very early age that money was something you never had enough of without ever being told the exact number. Vera's father had been gone since she was 11. Not dead, just gone. The way some men leave gradually and then all at once, until one day you realize weeks have passed without a phone call, and then months, and then enough time that the absence becomes its own kind of presence in the house. The shape of a person missing from the dinner table, the silence where an opinion used to be. Yin. She had a younger brother named Sammy. He was 9 years younger than her, which meant he was 9 years old the summer she turned 18, sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal and watching her pack a duffel bag with the calm acceptance of a child who has already learned not to ask too many questions about where things go when they leave. She kissed him on the top of his head before she walked out. She did not know then how long it would be before she could offer him anything more than that. What came after Medford was Eugene, which felt like a different planet for the first 3 weeks, and then began to feel slowly and incrementally like something possible. She got in on a Pell Grant and a partial scholarship to Lane Community College. It was not the plan she had imagined at 17 when the plan involved something bigger, something farther away, some version of a life that would look nothing like the one she had grown up watching. But Lane was what the math allowed, and Vera had always been good at doing what the math allowed. She found a job at a sandwich shop on 13th Avenue, closing shifts 4 nights a week. She became efficient in the particular way you become efficient when every hour matters and there is no margin for wasted motion. She learned to eat standing up. She learned to study at the counter between customers. She learned that the last 30 minutes of a closing shift when the bread is going stale and the line is empty and you are mopping for the third time is actually excellent for memorizing dates and equations. For 2 years it worked, not comfortably, not with any margin for error. But it worked in the way that things work when you hold very still and do not ask for more than what is exactly in front of you. Then the sandwich shop closed. It closed the way small businesses close in college towns without much warning, and with a hand-lettered sign in the window and a final paycheck that bounced once before it cleared. Vera found out on a Thursday. Her rent was due on the 1st, which was 8 days away, and her share of the apartment she had been splitting with 3 other women came to $340 a month, which was her entire sandwich shop income minus bus fare. She got another job at a grocery store on West 11th, but the hours were bad and the pay was worse, and before she could get her first full paycheck, the lease situation collapsed entirely. One of her roommates had stopped paying her share 3 months earlier, had been rolling it forward and hoping for a miracle, and the landlord had kept the whole security deposit and sent a letter that arrived on a Saturday with language about unpaid balances and legal remedies. Vera moved back to Medford. 8 months. It is a long time to go backward. She slept in her old bedroom, which was now also the room where Linda kept the extra printer cartridges and the artificial Christmas wreath. She worked at a hardware store on Jackson Street. She helped Sammy with his homework. She tried not to let herself feel what she was actually feeling, which was the particular, specific despair of a person who has glimpsed what might be possible and then watched it close again. Her mother did not make it worse. Linda was not the kind of woman who said, "I told you so," which was a mercy. But she also could not help. She had her own math problem, which had been running longer and without resolution. Vera left Medford again in March, 2 days after Sammy's 10th birthday, when a friend from her Eugene days called and said she had a couch in Portland and the city had jobs and maybe things were different enough now to try again. Things were not different, but the couch was real. Portland in 2022 was a city in the particular stage of becoming that is most uncomfortable for people who are not already comfortable. The housing market had done what housing markets in West Coast cities do when enough money moves in from elsewhere, which is to compress the distance between what people earn and what people pay until the distance disappears entirely for some and becomes unbridgeable for others. Vera found the warehouse job within 2 weeks of arriving. It was out in Troutdale, 14 miles east of the city in the Columbia River Gorge corridor, where the big distribution centers lined up along the highway like a second Portland. Nobody puts on a travel poster. Early shifts, physical work. The kind of job where your feet hurt by 10 a.m. and your back is negotiating with you by noon. The hourly rate was decent, not great, decent. Enough to look real on paper. Enough to make her believe for a few days that the math might work this time. She looked at rooms. She looked at shared houses. She sat in the parking lot of a grocery store in Northeast Portland one afternoon with her phone and a notebook and did the math 3 different ways. First, last, and security deposit. In Portland in 2022 for a room in a shared house in a neighborhood she could physically get to from Troutdale without owning a car, The number she kept arriving at was somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000. Her take-home from the warehouse, working full weeks, was roughly $2,100 a month after taxes. She did not have $3,000. She did not have anywhere close to $3,000. She had a canvas bag and a storage unit she had rented 2 weeks earlier to hold the things she had brought from Medford while she stayed on her friend's couch. The couch lasted 6 weeks before the friend's situation changed. It always changes. So Vera Dunmore, 22 years old with a job and a work ethic and more determination than most people twice her age, sat in the parking lot of that grocery store and arrived at the same answer every time. She could not make it work. Not yet. Not the way the numbers were arranged. What she had was a storage unit, $12 a day, a mattress, 2 boxes of clothes, a plastic bin of books she could not bring herself to donate to Goodwill because they were the one category of objects she had carried with her through every move and every loss, and she was not ready to stop carrying them. She had the key card to a gate that opened at 6 in the morning and locked at 10 at night, and she had nowhere else to go. She had been to unit number 14 maybe 8 times in the 2 weeks she had rented it. Enough times to know the route from the gate to the unit third corridor, to the left, past the vending machine that did not work, past the wall where someone had scratched initials into the stone with what must have been a very determined key. The unit was at the end of the corridor where the building curved slightly with the geometry of the original armory floor plan, so the back wall of unit number 14 was not flat but slightly angled, following the shape of the old stone structure behind it. The interior walls were drywall installed by the storage company in 1999, beige and unremarkable. But the back wall, the one that faced the original exterior of the 1891 building, was stone. Gray granite rough cut with mortar lines half an inch wide between the blocks. When you put your hand on it, even in October, even in the relative warmth of an autumn evening, the stone was cold in a way that went deeper than temperature. The kind of cold that belongs to mass, to weight, to the accumulated stillness of 131 years. The ceiling was the original armory ceiling. When the storage company had installed the interior walls, they had left the vaulted stone arch overhead intact because it was too expensive to lower and too structurally involved to modify. So unit number 14 had a drywall shell with a granite vault rising 12 feet above it, curving upward in the shape the original stonemasons had built in 1891 when they were constructing a place designed to hold things worth protecting. Vera had noticed the ceiling on her first visit. She had not thought much about it then. On the night she stayed for the first time, it was the first thing she really saw. It was a Tuesday, the 11th of October, 11 minutes before 10 o'clock at night. She punched the code and walked through the gate with her canvas bag and her foam pad, and she walked the route she knew to the third corridor, past the vending machine, past the initials in the stone to the door of unit number 14. She did not have a plan. That is the honest version of what happened. She had the beginning of a plan, which is not the same thing. The plan was to sleep here tonight because she had no other option that did not involve a car she did not yet own or a floor she had already used up her credit on. The plan was tonight only. She lifted the roll-up metal door and let it rattle to the top of its track and stood in the opening for a moment with the corridor light behind her. The unit smelled like dust and cold air and something faintly chemical from the moving blankets someone had left against one wall before her time. The mattress was in the back left corner where she had pushed it to make room for the boxes. The 2 boxes of clothes were stacked against the right wall. The plastic bin of books was open, and the top layer of paperbacks had shifted during the last time she had been in here, looking for her winter jacket, and they were partially out of alignment. She stepped in. She set the canvas bag on the floor. She unrolled the foam pad on the mattress. She sat down, and she looked up. The ceiling of unit number 14 was dark. What little light came in from the corridor gap at the base of the roll door cast a thin rectangle of pale illumination across the concrete floor, not reaching the walls, not reaching above 3 feet. The vault above her was invisible. She could feel it more than see it. The particular quality of silence that happens in a vaulted stone space, the way sound does not bounce flat and immediate, the way it does in a drywall room, but moves upward and softens and comes back slightly changed. She sat on the mattress in the dark and listened. She heard nothing. Not nothing in the way of quiet, nothing in the way of absence. In 6 weeks on her friend's couch, she had fallen asleep to the sound of the apartment's refrigerator cycling and traffic on the street and her friend's voice through the wall on late phone calls. In Medford before that, she had heard her mother's television through the ceiling and Sammy's alarm clock going off 6 minutes before he actually got up every morning. In Eugene, in the shared house with three other women, someone was always in the kitchen or in the bathroom or moving through the hallway. She had not heard nothing since she could not remember when. She sat on the mattress in unit number 14 of the Multnomah Armory self-storage building, and she heard nothing, and the nothing was so complete and so total that it took her a full 2 minutes to understand what was missing. Nobody could hear her breathe. Nobody was wondering if she was okay. Nobody was weighing whether her presence was a burden. Nobody was going to knock on the door in the morning with an expression that said the arrangement had run its course. Nobody was owed an explanation. Nobody was owed anything. She was in a room that cost $89 a month, and for exactly that $89, the room asked nothing of her. It did not need her to be cheerful. It did not need her to be grateful. It did not need her to be a house guest or a charity case or a girl from Medford who was figuring it out. It did not need her to be anything. She lay back on the mattress with her jacket still on and her boots still laced, and she looked up at the dark where the stone vault was, 131 years of granite above her, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not happiness, not relief, something quieter than both of those. Something she did not have a word for yet. She was not going to sleep well. The concrete floor was cold even through the foam pad and the mattress, and she had not thought to bring anything warmer than the jacket and the single blanket she had packed. It was October in Portland. The stone walls of the armory held the cold the way stone holds everything, completely and without negotiation. She was going to be cold and uncomfortable, and her back was going to hurt by morning. She stayed anyway. Not because she had calculated it, not because she had decided. She stayed because something in the quality of that silence in the dark under the vault that nobody had asked her to appreciate made it impossible to leave. She would figure out the rest in the morning. She would figure out whether this was tenable, whether it was sustainable, whether there was something else she had not thought of yet. Tonight she stayed. The gate locked at 10. She found out the next morning that she had not thought to check the exact time it opened. She was awake before 5, cold and stiff and alert in the way you are alert when you have slept somewhere unfamiliar, every small sound registering as possible significance. She lay on the mattress and watched the thin rectangle of light at the base of the roll door shift from black to dark gray to the pale particular gray of an Oregon autumn dawn. At 5:55, she rolled up the door and walked to the gate and found it locked. She waited. At 6:02, something in the gate's mechanism clicked and the latch disengaged, and she pushed through and walked to the bus stop at the end of the block and caught the 6:15 to a coffee shop where she bought a small black coffee and sat in a corner booth for an hour and thought about what she had just done. What she had done technically was sleep in a storage unit which the rental agreement almost certainly prohibited, which meant she was in a situation that could end at any moment and without warning if someone on the staff decided to investigate. She thought about that for a while. She thought about the fact that the staff consisted of 2 people, neither of whom seemed to work mornings, that the facility had a camera at the gate and cameras in the parking lot, but nothing inside the corridors, that her unit was at the end of the farthest corridor, and that she had not in 2 weeks of visits seen another customer in her section of the building. She thought about the window of access, 6 in the morning to 10 at night. That was 16 hours. Her shift started at 6:45 in Troutdale and ran until late afternoon. She would need to be out before 10 each night. On most nights, that was possible. On overtime shifts, it was not. On overtime shifts, she would need something else. She finished her coffee. She went to work. She did not make a decision. She did not need to yet. The decision she was not making had a shape to it, though. The shape of something that might be the only option that fit if you turned it just right and stopped trying to make it look like something it was not. By November, she had the outline of a system. She was in the unit most nights by 9:30. On overtime shifts, she slept in her car, which she bought in December for $2,200 cash from a man in Gresham who had bought a newer vehicle and needed the old one gone. A 2009 Civic Gray, 167,000 miles, with a broken driver's side window crank and a heater that took 4 minutes to warm up. She drove it to work every day, which solved the bus problem and gave her a backup plan for the nights the gate was already locked when her shift ended. She bought a foam pad rated for backpacking. She bought a headlamp. She bought a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, which she found at a surplus store on Powell for $31, and she bought a wool blanket from a thrift store on Barber for $4, and she layered them both and slept in thermal underwear and a fleece. And she was still cold, but she was manageable. She found the outlet in the back of the unit in her second week. A previous tenant had left a long orange extension cord coiled in the corner, and when she followed the cord, she found it terminated at a weatherproof outlet in the stone wall. The kind installed for outdoor use, which told her the storage company had run basic electrical at some point without bothering to tell her it existed. She charged her phone there. She charged the headlamp. She charged eventually everything that needed charging, running a cord from the orange extension to a small power strip she bought at a dollar store for $6. She joined Planet Fitness in November. $10 a month. She showered there before her shift, most mornings standing under the hot water longer than necessary because the hot water was included and it cost her nothing extra to stand in it. She kept her toiletries in a zip bag in the Civic. She learned which locker at the gym nobody ever used and kept an extra set of work clothes there through the winter. The address problem she did not solve until January. Her employer had her mother's address in Medford on file. Her bank account had her mother's address. She put her mail at her mother's address and drove to Medford twice in November to collect it, which was unsustainable, and in January she found a mail service on Burnside that rented you a real street address, not a P.O. box, an address that looked like an apartment number. $22 a month. She changed her address on every account. The food was actually the simplest part. The warehouse had a break room, a refrigerator she could use, a microwave. She ate breakfast and lunch at work. Dinner she made cold sandwiches, canned things eaten direct from the pull tab, top peanut butter from a jar with a spoon apples, and bananas bought in bunches from the grocery store near the Planet Fitness on the route between work and the Armory. She had a small cooler in the unit. Ice from the gas station next door, $3 for a bag that lasted 4 days. She spent roughly $40 a week on food. She told nobody any of this. She had nobody close enough to tell. The friend whose couch she had used was someone she knew casually from Eugene, someone who had been generous for 6 weeks and then had her own life to manage. Her co-workers at the warehouse were polite and mostly preoccupied. Her mother called on Sunday evenings and Vera answered, and they talked about Sammy, who was now in 5th grade, and had recently discovered he was good at drawing, and about the weather and about the trucking company where Linda still worked dispatch, and Vera said she was fine and had a place and was getting settled, and none of those things were exactly lies. The Armory held her in ways she had not anticipated. She had expected a storage unit. What she had was a stone room inside a 131-year-old fortress, and the difference was not merely aesthetic. The walls of unit number 14 were drywall on 3 sides, but the back wall was the original exterior granite of the 1891 building, 3 feet thick, cut from the same Columbia Gorge stone as the towers visible from the street. The vault overhead was the original Armory ceiling, arched and solid and indifferent to the world below it. When the wind came in from the west, which it did from November through March, with a steadiness that residents of the Pacific Northwest stopped noticing, after a decade the stone barely registered it. The metal storage units Vera had seen at facilities off Sandy Boulevard shook slightly in hard wind. The Armory did not shake. It did not flex. It had been built to withstand more than Oregon weather, and 131 years later, it was succeeding. The silence inside was different from regular silence. She had noticed that the first night, and she kept noticing it. The thickness of the walls changed the quality of sound in a way that was difficult to describe to someone who had not experienced it. Street noise from the block outside was not absent, but muted, pushed through 3 feet of granite and arriving at her ear stripped of its urgency. The rain, which was constant from November onward, landed on the building the way rain lands on a mountain, which is to say it had no effect on anything inside. She began to understand why someone had spent the money to build this thing in 1891. Not just the money, the intention. Someone had looked at a piece of ground in northeast Portland and decided it deserved a fortress. Not a building, not a storage structure. Something with towers and Gothic arches and walls that could stop more than the wind. She did not know then what her own version of that intention would look like. She only knew she was dry. She was relatively warm. She was saving money that had nowhere else to go. In December, she bought the Civic. In January, she solved the address problem. In February, she sat in the parking lot of the warehouse in Troutdale at 6:28 in the morning, 20 minutes before her shift started, and did the math for what she thought was the fifth time, but was actually the ninth because she had been running versions of this calculation in her head since October, and she kept arriving at the same number, and she kept disbelieving it and starting over. Total monthly expenses: unit number $1489, Planet Fitness $10, mail service $22, food roughly $160 being conservative, gas for the Civic $30 to $40 depending on overtime. The car insurance she had picked up in December when she registered it in Oregon, $68 a month, minimum required by law. Miscellaneous, the things that broke or ran out or needed replacement, maybe $30 if she was careful. She added it up in the notebook she kept in the canvas bag. $419. Monthly take-home from the warehouse working full weeks at her base rate was $2,112 after taxes. She had checked the number on her December pay stub and again on her January pay stub, and the number was consistent. $2,112 in, $419 out. The difference was $1,693 every month. She sat in the Civic in the parking lot of the Troutdale warehouse and looked at that number. $1,693 every month left over. That was the amount remaining after she had paid for everything she needed to survive. Not comfortably, not pleasantly, but survive. In 2 months, she had saved just over $2,000. She had never in her life had $2,000 in a bank account. She had never gotten close. She looked at the number and then she did a different calculation. At this rate, in 6 months, she would have roughly $10,000 saved. In 12 months, perhaps $18,000. In 18 months, she might be looking at something in the range of $25,000, accounting for the occasional car repair or unexpected expense. She put the notebook down on the passenger seat. Then she thought about what $25,000 would make possible for a 22-year-old woman who had been running on borrowed couches and borrowed time for the past year. She thought about what it would mean to have that kind of ground under her feet. Actual ground. The kind that does not shift when someone else's situation changes. And then she thought about the apartment, because here was what she had not considered in all the time she had run this calculation before. She had been thinking of the storage unit as a stopgap, a bridge between where she was and where she needed to get to, which was a real apartment with a real lease and a real address. The standard endpoint, the place you go when you have saved enough to cover first, last, and deposit. First, last, and deposit in Portland for a studio or a shared room in a neighborhood she could reach from Troutdale was somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. Depending on the place, depending on the landlord, depending on the month. She had already saved $2,000. In 2 more months, she would have enough. She could leave. This was the thing she had been building toward without naming it since October. Save enough. Leave the unit. Get a real place. Return to something recognizable as a normal life. She sat in the parking lot and held that thought and did not feel what she had expected to feel, which was relief. She felt something much quieter and much more complicated, and in some way that she was not ready to articulate, much more frightening. If she left now, if she took the 2 more months of savings and used them as a deposit on an apartment, she would be paying somewhere between $1,300 and $1,600 a month in rent for the rest of the foreseeable future. That was the Portland market. That was what a room cost, a real room in a shared house, in a neighborhood that was not completely outside what her warehouse salary could reach. She would go from spending $419 a month to spending between $1,700 and $210 a month. Her savings rate would drop from $1,600 a month to somewhere between $0 and $400. She would be comfortable. She would be normal. She would be exactly where she had been trying to get since she arrived in this city. She would also, within 18 months, be exactly where she had been before she came to Portland at all. Splitting rent with strangers whose financial situations she could not control in an apartment she did not own and could not afford to stay in. If one person stopped paying with a deposit she had probably already lost in her mind, because that was how deposits worked. She stared through the windshield at the parking lot. A coworker walked past and raised a hand, and she raised a hand back. The morning was gray and cold the way Oregon February mornings are gray and cold without drama, as a simple matter of fact. She picked up the notebook. She did not recalculate the rent scenario. She had already done it. She wrote one sentence in the notebook at the bottom of the page where she had been running the numbers. She would not show this notebook to anyone for 3 more years, so she did not write it for an audience. She wrote it because she needed to see it outside her own head. She wrote, "I could leave. I am choosing not to." She closed the notebook. She put it in the canvas bag. She got out of the Civic and walked into the warehouse and clocked in at 6:44, 1 minute early, and began her shift. The decision she had just made was not dramatic. There was no moment of clarity, no revelation, no sudden sense of destiny. There was only a 22-year-old woman in a parking lot in Troutdale, choosing the option that the math supported the way she had always chosen things, the way Medford had taught her to choose things by looking at what was real and working with what she actually had instead of what she wished she had. She had a stone room in a 131-year-old fortress that asked $89 a month and nothing else from her. She was keeping it, not because she had no other option. That was the old version of the story, the version she had been telling herself since October, and it had just stopped being true. She had another option now. She had the deposit money. She could leave. She was staying because staying was the right choice. Because the math said something had changed, and she was the one who had changed it, and she was not ready to stop. She thought about Sammy, 10 years old in Medford, drawing things at the kitchen table while her mother worked dispatch. She thought about what it would mean to save not just enough to rent a room from someone else, but enough to do something that could not be taken away. She did not know what that looked like yet. She had not read the books yet, had not sat in the library yet, had not found the forums or the articles or the specific clarity that would come 18 months from now. But she understood the shape of the thing she was building even if she could not yet name it. She was building ground, real ground. The kind that does not belong to a landlord who can raise the price, or a roommate who can stop paying, or a lease that can end. She did not know what form that ground would eventually take. She only knew that it required time, and it required the saving rate she had discovered in that parking lot on a gray February morning. And the saving rate required the stone room. The stone room required the fortress. The fortress was still there on the corner of its block in northeast Portland, its two granite towers rising into the February sky. Its walls 3 feet thick and 131 years old, indifferent to the weather and to the century, and to everything that had changed around it while it simply continued to stand. It was hers for $89 a month. She went to work. The thing about living inside a problem is that the problem stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like a set of conditions. Vera had been inside her set of conditions for 4 months by the time February turned into March, and the conditions had not changed, but her relationship to them had changed in the way that a person's relationship to anything changes when they stop trying to escape it and start trying to understand it. The unit was cold. The unit was dark. The unit had no running water and no heat source, and a roll-up door that let in a thin band of Oregon air at its base all winter long. These were facts. She was not going to make them not facts by wishing, and she had never been much of a wisher anyway. So she worked on the facts. The cold was the first problem she had addressed back in November with the sleeping bag and the wool blanket and the foam pad under the mattress. That combination had gotten her through the first weeks. But the first weeks were early November when the temperature in Portland was dropping, but had not yet committed to its worst. By December, the temperature inside unit number 14 was hovering in the low 40s by midnight and dropping further before dawn. She knew this because she bought a small digital thermometer from a dollar store and attached it to the stone wall with a piece of duct tape, and she checked it every night before she went to sleep. And every morning when she woke up and she wrote the numbers in her notebook, the same way she wrote her expenses, because data was the only tool she had for understanding what she was dealing with. The sleeping bag got her through December. Barely. She added a second layer under the mattress, a piece of closed-cell foam she found at a thrift store for $3, and the difference was substantial enough that she understood something she had not understood before. The cold she was fighting was not only coming from the air, it was coming from the ground. The concrete floor of the unit was a direct conductor of the Earth's temperature below it, which in Oregon winter was around 40 degrees, and no amount of blankets on top of a body can fully compensate for 40 degrees of cold pressing up through a mattress from below. The second foam layer addressed 60% of that problem. The remaining 40% she addressed with every layer of clothing she owned, which in December meant thermal underwear, fleece pants, 2 pairs of wool socks, a long-sleeve shirt, a fleece and a jacket, all of it worn to bed so that she was essentially sleeping fully dressed every night, which was uncomfortable in a way that was difficult to describe but possible to live with. She was living with a great many things that were difficult to describe but possible to live with. The darkness was easier to solve than the cold, once she stopped thinking of it as an atmosphere problem and started thinking of it as an engineering problem. The headlamp she had bought in November was functional but narrow. It gave her a cone of light wherever she pointed her head, which was adequate for finding things, but not adequate for reading or for any task that required looking at something other than the precise direction her skull was aimed. She found a camping supply forum online and read about LED lanterns and panel lights, and she found a set of clip-on LED panels at a sporting goods clearance sale in January for $11 a piece. She bought 3. They ran on rechargeable batteries. She charged them in rotation from the outlet in the back wall, cycling them through the power strip so that one was always fully charged while one was in use and one was on the backup rack. The 3 panels together, clipped to the shelving unit she had not yet built, positioned at different angles around the space, gave her enough light to read by. This mattered more than she would have expected it to matter. Reading was what she did in the hours between getting home and going to sleep, and reading in the unit with the panels casting their flat LED light against the stone and drywall walls was something she came to look forward to with a specific and private pleasure that had nothing to do with the quality of the space and everything to do with the quality of the silence. She read in bed with her jacket on, in 3 LED panels, making the vaulted ceiling visible above her, and the books she had carried from Medford to Eugene to Medford again, and finally to the stone room did not care where they were being read. They were just books. The vault was just stone. The combination of the two was hers, and it was quiet, and for an hour every night before she went to sleep, it was enough. She built the shelf in March. Not a shelf, a shelving unit. There is a difference. A shelf is a board. A shelving unit is a structure, 4 uprights and 3 horizontal lengths designed to hold weight and stay level on an imperfect surface, which the concrete floor of unit number 14 was not precisely. She had been to the Restore on Southeast Powell twice before she found what she needed, which was a set of pine boards in varying lengths left over from someone's renovation project sold for $14 for the lot. She loaded them into the Civic and drove them to the Armory on a Sunday afternoon and spent 2 hours measuring and cutting and assembling in the corridor outside the unit because the unit itself was too small for the work. The shelf went against the back wall, the stone wall. It fit almost exactly, which was partly planning and partly the particular luck that comes from doing something for the first time and somehow getting it nearly right. She moved her clothes from the 2 cardboard boxes to the shelves. She folded them each item the way she had not been folding them because there had been nowhere to fold them to. She organized them by type. Work clothes on the top shelf, everything else below arranged by weight, heavier things at the bottom where she could reach them without thinking, lighter things at the top where she could see them. It sounds small, it was not small. There is something that happens when you organize a space that you have been living in disorganized. It is not cosmetic. It changes the way the space feels when you are in it, and it changes the way you feel when you are in the space. And both of those things are real, whether or not anyone outside the space can perceive them. The unit had been functional. After the shelf, it began to be something else, something without a precise name, something adjacent to home, in the way that a place can be adjacent to a word without quite earning it. She found the rug in April at a Goodwill on Barber Boulevard. Thick wool muted red and brown, roughly 4 feet by 6 feet, clearly from a house that had cared about its floors once. $6. She put it down in the sleeping area between the foot of the mattress and the roll door, and she stood on it in her socks. And the difference between standing on concrete and standing on wool was immediate and complete. She bought the plant in May, a pothos, because she had read that pothos plants survive almost any indoor condition, including low light, inconsistent watering, and the particular neglect of a person who is keeping it alive in a storage unit inside a granite armory. She put it on the highest shelf where it got the most ambient light from the LED panels in the thin gap under the roll door. She named it Nothing. She watered it every 3 days with water from the small jug she kept filled at the Planet Fitness. It did not die. It did not die all through May and June and July. It grew slowly the way things grow when they have almost nothing to work with. A new leaf every couple of weeks. Nothing dramatic. But she started checking it in the mornings before she left for the shift. A quick look at the top shelf and the checking became a thing she did without thinking about doing it, which meant it had become a habit, which meant it had become part of the structure of her days. She kept the notebook running all this time. Every Sunday evening, she added up the week's expenses, wrote the total in the column on the right side of the page, and did the running calculation of how much had accumulated in the bank account. She did not do this to feel good about the number. She did it because the number was information, and information was the only thing between her and the alternative, which was to feel like she was treading water in the dark. The number told her she was not treading water. The number told her she was moving. April came in cold and damp the way April comes in Portland, where the difference between April and March is mostly theoretical, and spring announces itself in degrees so small you have to look for them rather than feel them. She had been in the unit for 6 months. She got sick in the second week of April. It started as the kind of thing she had learned to ignore: a scratchy throat, a heaviness behind the eyes, the slight general dimming that signals the immune system has rerouted some of its resources. She went to work anyway. She worked a full shift on Tuesday and a full shift on Wednesday, and came home Wednesday night and lay down on the mattress and could not get up. The temperature in the unit that night was 38 degrees. She had checked the thermometer. 38 degrees is above freezing by 6 degrees, which is not much of a margin when your body is running a fever and you are lying on a foam mattress in a granite room wearing every piece of clothing you own. She lay there through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. She did not go to work on Thursday, which meant she called in, which she had not done since starting the job. And the person who answered was Darcy Pruitt from the loading team, who said, "Feel better," and asked no questions, and hung up. Vera lay back down. She lay there and looked at the vaulted ceiling above her. In the daytime, with the thin light coming in under the roll door, she could just see the curve of the granite arch. In the night, she could not see it, but she could feel it, the particular quality of space above her, that a vault creates the sense of height and enclosure at the same time. She had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing things that are constant. Now she noticed it again. She was 38 degrees cold and her throat hurt and her head was thick with the particular pressure of a sinus infection, and she lay under the stone vault in unit number 14 and thought for the first time in 6 months that she might have made a terrible mistake. Not a passing thought. The real version of the thought. The one that had been sitting in the corner of every decision she had made since February, quiet and patient, waiting for a moment when she was vulnerable enough to hear it. You are living in a storage unit. You have a fever. If this gets worse, you have no one who knows where you are. You have no way to get to a doctor without calling in and losing more pay. You are 38 degrees cold in a stone room that nobody knows you are in, and you are 22 years old, and this is what you chose. She let herself have the thought. She did not try to argue with it or reframe it or find the counter evidence. She was too tired for that. She let it sit with her for a while in the dark under the vault, and it sat there heavy and honest and real. Then she reached for her phone. She did not think about who she was calling. Her hands went to her contacts and found her mother's name and pressed it before she had decided to press it. It rang twice. Linda Dunmore picked up on the second ring, which was how Linda always answered when Vera called, because Linda worked the kind of job where you picked up quickly or you missed the call, and she had never been able to turn that habit off for personal calls. Vera said she was not feeling well. Linda asked where she was. Vera said Portland, which was true, and said she was at her place, which was also technically true, and did not say anything more specific than that. Linda asked what kind of sick. Vera described the symptoms. Linda said it sounded like the sinus thing that had gone through Medford in March, and that it usually broke in 3 to 4 days if you rested and stayed warm. Stayed warm. Vera almost laughed. She did not. There was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that exists between a mother and a daughter who have been talking around the things they are not saying for long enough that the silences have become a language of their own. Linda had not asked directly about Vera's housing situation in 3 months. Vera had not offered information. They had arrived at a mutual agreement unspoken and therefore unbreakable to talk about Sammy and the weather and the trucking company and leave the rest of it alone. Linda said into the silence, "You were never someone who quit when it got hard." She said it simply without weight as a statement of fact. Not a pep talk, not a performance, just a thing she had observed about her daughter over 22 years and was choosing to say out loud. Vera did not say anything for a moment. Then she said she knew. She said she would be fine. She said she would call on Sunday. She hung up. She lay in the dark for a long time after that. The fever had crested and she could feel it, that particular quality of heat behind the eyes that tells you the body is working and will keep working. She was cold. She was uncomfortable. She was alone in a stone room in the middle of Portland at some hour of the night that she did not check because knowing the hour would not help anything. But she was not going to quit. That was settled now. What was less settled was the more specific problem, which was the cold. Not the discomfort cold that she had been managing with clothing and blankets. The real cold, the 38-degree cold that had been part of the equation since October, and that she had been handling through pure endurance. And that was not a sustainable solution for a person who intended to stay in this space for significantly longer than 6 months. She needed to solve the heating problem. Not partially. Actually, she started thinking about it that Thursday, lying sick on the mattress, because thinking about a solvable problem was better than thinking about the unsolvable ones. And she had learned early that the unsolvable ones get quieter when you give your attention to the ones you can actually do something about. A space heater was the obvious answer, and also the wrong one. She had looked into space heaters in November, and the fire risk in an enclosed space with no ventilation was not something she was willing to accept. Not with everything she owned in the room. Not with the stone walls and the roll door, and no way out fast enough. She eliminated space heaters permanently and moved on. She thought about heated blankets. She had seen them in drugstores and big box stores, the kind that plug into a wall and keep a constant low temperature. They required an outlet. She had an outlet. She looked them up on her phone that Thursday afternoon, lying in the dim light under the vault, and found that most of them required continuous wall power, which she had, but that they also drew significantly in power consumption, which might register on the facility's systems. She kept looking. She found the battery-powered heated mattress pad on a liquidation website Friday morning. It ran on a rechargeable battery pack that you charge separately and then attached to the pad. Full charge lasted approximately 8 hours, which was exactly the length of a night's sleep. It had 3 heat settings, low, medium, and high, and even on low, it maintained a surface temperature of approximately 95 degrees under the covers, which would transform the thermal situation in the sleeping area entirely. It cost $67, which she did not have in cash, but had in her savings account, which she had been treating as untouchable, but which she now recognized as containing funds for exactly this kind of problem. This was the kind of problem the savings existed to solve. She ordered it on Friday. It arrived Tuesday. She charged the battery pack from the outlet in the back wall for a full 12 hours before the first use. The first night she used it, she took off the jacket she had been sleeping in since October. That was what $67 bought. Not comfort, not luxury. The ability to sleep in her own room without wearing a jacket. She lay on the mattress with the heat working its way up through the pad and into the mattress and into her back, and she thought about what had just happened. She had identified a problem. She had looked for the cheapest solution that actually solved it, not the cheapest solution that partially addressed it. She had spent money she had told herself was untouchable, and the problem was solved. The process had a shape to it. The shape was this: define the problem precisely. Find the actual solution, not the almost solution. Execute. She did not know yet that this process would become the template for everything that came after. She only knew that she was no longer cold at night, that the fever had broken on Saturday, as her mother had predicted, and that she had gone back to work on Monday without having quit anything. By the time summer came, unit number 14 had changed. Not dramatically. Nothing in Vera's life changed dramatically. Things changed incrementally, one solved problem at a time. each solution becoming part of the structure of the next month, each month building on the architecture of the one before it. She added a mirror in June. A small square mirror she found at an estate sale for $2 hung on a drywall screw on the side wall, positioned so she could see herself when she was getting ready for the morning shift. The mirror sounds trivial. It was not trivial. There is something that happens to your sense of yourself when you stop being able to see your own face for months at a time. Something quiet and incremental and not entirely good, and the mirror reversed it. She added the community center to her routine in June as well for the days when her route to work did not pass the Planet Fitness. There was a community center on Burnside with public showers available on weekday mornings for a suggested donation. She donated $2 each time. The showers were functional and clean, and nobody asked any questions. And functional and clean and no questions was all she needed. She went to the Multnomah County Library for the first time in June. She went because the library was warm and she had nowhere to be on a Sunday afternoon, and she walked in and found a chair by a window and sat there for 3 hours with a book she had not paid for and a cup of coffee she had not bought because they did not have coffee in the library, but she was warm and the light was good and nobody bothered her. She went back the next Sunday, then the Sunday after that. The library became the Sunday structure. She was there when they opened and she left when she felt ready to leave. She read. She used the computers. She found things she had not gone looking for the way you find things in libraries when you give them enough time, which is how libraries are supposed to work, and how they almost never get credit for working. She found a section on personal finance in July, not the books with photographs of yachts on the cover. The actual ones, the ones written by people who had been broke and had worked their way out of it by thinking differently about money rather than by earning more of it. She read about the difference between assets and liabilities. She read about what it meant to own something versus renting something, and how the math of ownership versus renting shifted over long periods of time, and what it took to get to a position where ownership was possible when you were starting from nothing. She thought about Sammy when she read those books. Not specifically. The thought of Sammy was the background of every plan she made, the gravity that gave her plans direction without always being named. She did not know yet what form her responsibility to him would take. She only knew that it existed and that the shape of what she was building in unit number 14 was related to it, was answerable to it in ways she could not fully articulate yet, but could feel clearly. She sat in the library on Sundays and she read, and she thought, and the Granite Armory waited for her 4 blocks away, its towers unchanged, its stone indifferent, its $89 monthly bill, the most reliable thing in her life. The third Tuesday of September was the morning the thing she had not prepared for happened. She had been in the unit for 11 months. She had nearly $9,000 in her bank account. She had not been sick since April. She had worked every shift available done, every overtime hour offered, declined 2 invitations to after-work events because the math of the late hour and the gate closing time did not work, and had accepted the solitude that required with the same practical attitude she applied to everything else. She drove the Civic out to the Troutdale warehouse that Tuesday. The morning was the particular clear that Oregon, September mornings can be the smoke from summer fires mostly gone. The light changed in the way it changes in September, coming from a slightly lower angle, less direct, more golden. She parked in the lot at 6:38 and walked toward the building's side entrance, the one the day shift used. And she stopped. There was a figure sitting on the concrete barrier at the edge of the lot. Sitting, small knees pulled up a dark blue backpack, leaning against the barrier beside a set of legs that were too long for the torso above them, the particular geometry of a teenager in the middle of a growth year who has not quite caught up with his own height yet. She knew the backpack. She had bought it at a Target in Medford 3 years ago. With money she'd gotten from a birthday card, bought it for a 9-year-old who had just started caring about what his backpack looked like and was old enough to have opinions about it. Sammy Dunmore was 14 years old. He was sitting outside her place of work at 6:38 in the morning with $43 in his pocket because she would find that out later. And he had ridden the Greyhound from Medford, which was a 5-hour trip, arriving in Portland at 5:15 a.m. And he had walked from the bus station to the warehouse address that was the only address he had for his sister. A walk that had taken him over an hour and had covered parts of the city that a 14-year-old from Medford probably should not be walking through alone at 5:30 in the morning. He looked up when she was still 20 feet away. He saw her. His face did the thing that faces do when the relief is too big and too sudden to process properly, a kind of involuntary brightness that passes almost instantly into something more controlled, because he was 14 and 14-year-olds do not want to show that the relief is too big. She walked to him. She sat down on the concrete barrier beside him without saying anything first. He said he was sorry. She said, "Don't be." She said, "How long have you been here?" He said, "Since about 6." She did not say anything for a moment. A coworker walked past and raised a hand, and she raised a hand back, and then she turned and looked at her brother, who was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans and the sneakers he had gotten at the beginning of the school year, and who looked like he had not slept on the Greyhound, or if he had not, well. She said what happened. He told her, not in a rush, not dramatically, the way the Dunmore family always told things, which was straight and without embellishment, because their mother had never had patience for embellishment, and they had both learned to communicate in facts. The facts were that their mother's situation had changed in August, that the man who had been in the picture for the past year had changed the situation in ways that Sammy described in the careful terms of a 14-year-old trying to be accurate without being melodramatic, and that Sammy had spent 2 weeks trying to figure out what to do, and had arrived at the decision that Vera was what to do. He had her work address. He did not have her home address. He had never had her home address because she had given everyone the mail service address, which was a suite number in a building on Burnside that was not where she lived. She had $9,000 in her bank account. She had that thought sitting on the concrete barrier next to her 14-year-old brother. And the thought had a quality she had not felt before, a quality of the money becoming suddenly and specifically real in a way it had not been when it was just a number in a notebook. $9,000 in the account was abstract. $9,000 when your brother has ridden 5 hours on a Greyhound with $43 and is sitting outside your workplace at 6:38 in the morning was not abstract at all. She had not missed a shift since April. She said to Sammy, "I need you to wait here for 2 more minutes." She went inside and found her shift supervisor, a man named Bill, who had worked at the warehouse for 11 years and who understood that things happened in people's lives that were outside their control, and she told him her brother had shown up from out of town with a family situation and she needed to take the day. Bill said, "Take it." She did not even have to explain more than that. She came back out and she and Sammy walked to the Civic. She drove him to a diner on Glisson Street that she knew opened early, and they sat in a booth and she ordered coffee for herself and food for Sammy, who ate with the concentrated efficiency of someone who has been awake since before dawn and has not eaten since the night before. And she watched him eat and thought about the next part. The next part had complications. She could not take Sammy to her home because her home was unit number 14 of the Multnomah Armory self-storage building, and a 14-year-old boy staying in a storage unit was a different situation than a 22-year-old woman staying in a storage unit, and the risk of discovery increased significantly with 2 people. And beyond the risk, there was the simple fact that a 150-square-foot stone room with no running water and a roll-up door was not a suitable long-term environment for a teenager. But she could not send him back to Medford until she knew what he was going back to, and she could not set him up somewhere she had not set up yet. So she needed a few days, maybe more, to make calls and figure out what was possible, which meant she needed somewhere for Sammy to be in the meantime. She took him to the armory that evening. She did not explain everything. She told him the truth, which was that she was keeping her stuff here, and sometimes she stayed here, and that it was temporary. Sammy looked at the armory building from the sidewalk for a long time before she opened the gate. He tilted his head back to take in the height of the towers. He said nothing. Inside in the corridor, she watched him process the stone walls. The Gothic arch details the dim light, the silence. She could see him filing it away the way Sammy had always filed things away, with a visual memory that was better than anyone else in the family. She unlocked unit number 14 and rolled up the door. Sammy stood in the opening and looked at the shelves. The LED panels, the mattress with its layers, the pothos on the top shelf, the rug on the floor, the small power strip with its organized cords, the digital thermometer on the stone wall. He said, "You made this." She said, "I made what worked." He said nothing else for a moment. Then he stepped in and sat down on the rug cross-legged and looked around at the space the way people look at things that are not what they expected and are trying to recalibrate. He said, "It's kind of like a room." She said, "It is a room." He stayed 11 days. She drove him to the Planet Fitness in the mornings and he showered there on her membership, while she showered too, which was technically against the terms of the membership, and also technically not visible to anyone because the shower area was a row of individual stalls with doors that locked. She bought him a cot from a thrift store for $12 and set it up in the unit beside the mattress. And the arrangement was crowded, in the particular way that two people in a 150 square foot space is always crowded, which is not comfortable but is manageable. She spent those 11 days making calls. She called Linda. The conversation was long and not easy, and she did not record what was said in her notebook and did not describe it later in detail because some conversations belong only to the people who have them. She came away from it with a clearer picture of the situation in Medford, and the picture was not one she was willing to leave Sammy in without a different arrangement in place first. She called their aunt in Eugene, their father's sister Carol, who had stayed in contact through the years, in the way some relatives do, even when the central figure has left out of her own sense of what family means, rather than obligation. Carol was a reliable woman, measured and practical, who worked at a dental office and owned a small house with a spare bedroom. She said yes without significant deliberation. She said, of course. The arrangement would cost money. First month's additional expenses for food and incidentals, while Sammy settled school enrollment fees, the practical costs of adding a person to a household that had not budgeted for one. Vera calculated the number and did not flinch at it. She transferred the money to Carol the day before she drove Sammy to Eugene, $380 for the first month, with an agreement to contribute $200 a month for the next 6 months, while Carol absorbed the larger costs. $200 a month for 6 months was $1,200. She ran the numbers. She could do it. Not without adjusting the savings rate, but she could do it. She drove Sammy to Eugene on a Sunday morning in late September. She did not tell him the exact shape of her arrangement in Portland. She told him she had something figured out and that it was working and that she was saving money and that the money was for things that mattered. She told him Carol was good and that Eugene was where she had been happiest in her own adult life and that the change of scene was not a punishment. He said he knew. He said, "Thanks, Vera." She said, "Don't thank me." She drove back to Portland alone on the 5 North, the Columbia River Gorge, opening up on her right side as she came up through the hills, the river flat and gray and enormous below the highway, the light going down fast, the way it goes down fast in Oregon. September, all at once and without ceremony. She thought about the $9,000. She thought about the pothos on the top shelf. She thought about the fact that 11 days in a storage unit in a stone armory building had not seemed to diminish Sammy the way she had feared it might, that he had not looked at the space with horror, but with something she was less able to name, something that looked in quiet moments almost like recognition. She thought about what it had meant to have the money when she needed it. Not as an idea, as an actual immediate available resource that could solve a real problem in a real person's real life today, without hesitation, without borrowing, without owing anyone anything. The money had not been abstract on the morning Sammy was sitting on that concrete barrier. That was what she had been building. She was 23 by October. The second winter in the armory was different from the first in every way that mattered. She had the heated pad now. She had the 3 LED panels. She had the shelf with its organized contents and the rug and the mirror and the pothos which had grown over the summer and was now reaching its vines down the back of the shelf toward the floor. She had 2 winters' worth of knowledge about what the unit needed and when it needed it. She had the Civic with the functioning heater and the gym bag in the back seat and the routine that ran like a watch on most days, which is to say imperfectly but consistently. The second winter was survivable not because the conditions had improved, though some of them had. It was survivable because she knew what she was doing now. She was not improvising. She was executing a system she had built from the problems that had found her, and the system worked and she trusted it. She spent Saturday afternoons working overtime when it was offered, and Sunday mornings at the community center on Burnside, and Sunday afternoons at the library on Northeast Multnomah. She read more of the books about money and housing and the alternative structures people had built when the standard ones did not fit. She found threads online, read them on her phone in the library, with the October rain on the windows outside, people describing things they had built or bought or arranged that existed outside the conventional. She wrote notes in the margins of the notebook. Not plans yet, notes. The way you write things down when you are not sure what you are learning, but you are sure you are learning it. The savings continued. $200 a month to Eugene through March. The Civic needed a tire in November, $82 at a discount tire on 82nd that she had noticed always had lines on Saturday mornings but was faster on weekday afternoons. She noted the expense adjusted the week's calculation moved on. The savings rate was lower than it had been before Sammy, but it was not gone. It was never gone. She had arranged her life so that the floor was always above zero, so that no month could produce a number that was not positive, and the floor held even when the ceiling was lower. By December, the bank account had crossed $12,000. By February of the second year, it was $14,000. She went to the library on February Sundays, and she sat in the same chair she had been sitting in since June of the previous year, and she read and she thought and she let the number grow, in the way you let a thing grow when you understand that interference is not the same as attention. Spring came in its usual fashion, which in Portland means it does not arrive so much as the winter loosens a degree at a time with the reversals. There were days in March that felt like November, and days in April that felt like June, and Vera moved through them with a slightly removed quality that had become her natural state. The quality of a person who has lived inside a set of conditions long enough to have stopped being surprised by them. She was 23 and 8 months old. She had been in the armory for 18 months. The pothos had grown so substantially that she had been forced to redirect its longest vines along the top shelf rather than letting them hang free, and the redirection had worked, and now it ran along the full length of the top shelf and was beginning to consider the wall. The library Sunday in April was warm. Not warm outside, but warm inside the way libraries are warm in spring when the heating system overshoots slightly and the light from the windows has actual heat in it, and the combination produces a drowsy, comfortable quality that is completely at odds with the purpose of being there, which is to think. She was not drowsy. She was looking at her phone. She was looking at her bank account balance, which she checked on Sundays. The way other people check weather forecasts is a way of orienting herself to what was coming. The number was $18,042. She looked at it for a while. She looked at it the way you look at a number that is larger than any number you have ever personally inhabited. A number that belongs to a category of people that has never included you or anyone in your family, and that now includes you, and that you are not entirely sure how to hold in your mind. She had not told anyone this number. Not her mother, who would have asked how, and not her brother, who would have gotten a look she did not want to see on his face, and not anyone at the warehouse, because the warehouse was the place she went to earn the money and not the place she discussed it. $18,042. She had grown up in a house where $400 in the checking account was a good month. She had grown up hearing the word tight used about money the way you use a word so often it stops meaning anything specific and just means a permanent condition of the air. She had inherited that understanding of money the way children inherit most things, which is not through instruction, but through the quality of the silence that surrounds the topic. She sat in the library chair and looked at the number and tried to feel what she expected to feel, which was something like triumph, something like arrival. The specific satisfaction of having built something real from conditions that were not designed for building. What she felt instead was very quiet and slightly complex, and not entirely what she expected. She put her phone in her pocket and walked back through the library to return the book she had been reading. She checked out 2 others. She put them in the canvas bag, and she walked out into the April afternoon and drove back to the armory. The gate opened when she punched the code. She walked down the corridor, past the vending machine, past the initials carved into the stone to unit number 14. There was something on the door. A piece of paper, white folded, once taped at the center with a strip of blue painter's tape. She pulled it off the door. She unfolded it. It was not handwritten. It was printed on company letterhead, the letterhead of a company called Meridian Development Group, and at the top of the page below the logo in the particular font that real estate developers use when they are communicating information they know is unwelcome and have decided to communicate anyway, was this. Notice to all Multnomah Armory self-storage tenants. Please be advised that as of April 14th, 2024, the Multnomah Armory property has been acquired by Meridian Development Group. This acquisition includes all buildings and structures on the property. All current storage rental agreements will be honored through the end of the current rental period. Following that date, all tenants will be required to vacate their units. You have 90 days from the date of this notice to remove all stored items and return your keycard. The Multnomah Armory building will be redeveloped as Meridian Armory Residences, a boutique luxury loft community. Leasing information will be available later this year. Starting rents will begin at $2,800 per month. We appreciate your understanding during this transition. She read it twice. Then she stood in the corridor for a while, holding the paper with both hands, the way you hold something when your hands need to be doing something while your mind does its work. She looked up at the corridor, the stone walls, the curve of the vaulted ceiling above the corridor running between units, the same stone that had been standing since 1891. The same stone that had been here through 2 world wars and a depression and 3 earthquakes and the entire lifetime of everyone she had ever known. The same stone that had held her for 18 months, that had been 38 degrees cold in winter and 60 degrees in summer, and indifferent to everything, absolutely indifferent to everything, which was the quality she had valued most about it. $2,800 a month. The building that had cost her $89 a month to occupy was about to cost some other person $2,800 a month to occupy. And the difference was the addition of a kitchen and a bathroom and a finished floor, and a concierge desk in the lobby, and a name that included the word luxury, and the subtraction of everything that had made this place what it actually was, which was a 133-year-old structure built to withstand things that mattered. She looked at the notice for a long time. Then she looked at the door of unit number 14, which was the same roll-up door it had been for 18 months, unadorned, functional, with the unit number stenciled in black paint at eye level. She had $18,000. She had 90 days. The building that had held her was being taken away and converted into something she could never afford, and the system that had made it possible for Meridian Development Group to buy this building and price it at $2,800 a month was the same system that had priced her out of Portland in the first place, when she was 21 years old and doing the math in a parking lot. She reached out and rolled the door up. The unit was the same. The pothos trailed along the shelf. The rug lay on the concrete. The 2 photos were pinned to the wall, the Beau Bien and Sammy. The thermometer read 54 degrees. The thermometer had been on this wall for 17 months. She put her hand on the stone back wall. The same cold it always was. The same mass. The same 133 years of indifference. She had 90 days. She picked up the notebook from the shelf and wrote the date at the top of the page. Then she wrote 90 days, $18,000. Figure out what comes next. She closed the notebook. She sat down on the mattress. And she started thinking. 90 days is a specific kind of time. It is not long enough to forget what you are counting down from. And it is not short enough to create the clean urgency of a crisis. It sits in between, in the territory where you have enough time to think carefully and not enough time to be careless, and the thinking and the not being careless have to happen simultaneously, which is a particular kind of pressure that Vera had not experienced before in quite this form. She had experienced the pressure of not having enough money. She had experienced the pressure of not having enough time. She had experienced the pressure of a situation that required a solution she could not yet see. But the 90-day notice was all 3 of those things at once, and it was also something else, something that took her several days to name. It was an ending, not a failure. The unit had not failed her. She had not failed the unit. The building was being sold because buildings get sold, because the economics of Portland real estate in 2024 made a 133-year-old granite armory more valuable as luxury housing than as storage. And that calculus had nothing to do with Vera Dunmore, and everything to do with forces that had been in motion long before she had ever needed a place to sleep that cost less than a studio apartment. But it was ending, and the ending required a decision about what came next. And the decision about what came next was not as simple as it had appeared from the outside of it, which is to say from the perspective of month 2, when she had told herself the unit was temporary, and the next step was a real apartment, and the saving was just the method of getting there. The next step had changed shape in 18 months. She had changed the shape of it herself gradually, and without entirely realizing she was doing it, in the library on Sundays, and in the notebook on Sunday evenings, and in the specific way she thought about the $18,000 that was no longer abstract and no longer felt like a bridge back to where she had been. She spent the first week after the notice doing what she always did with a problem she had not yet solved. She kept moving. She worked every shift. She came home to the unit and she put her hand on the stone wall and she sat on the mattress and she did not try to force the answer into existence before it was ready. She had learned in 18 months that forcing answers produced the wrong answers and that the right answer usually appeared in the space between working hard and keeping still. She went to the library the first Sunday after the notice and she sat in her chair and she did not read anything from the shelf. She opened her notebook and she wrote at the top of a clean page, "What do I actually want? Not what was available, not what was affordable, not what was next in the conventional sequence of a person's housing journey. What did she actually want if wanting was a thing she was allowed to do without immediately running it through the filter of what was possible?" She sat with the question for a long time. The library was busy that Sunday, families at the tables near the children's section. A man at the computer terminals, who had been there every Sunday since June of last year, always at the same terminal, always in the same corduroy jacket. A teenager lying on her stomach in the young adult section with a book propped against a backpack. Vera looked at the blank page below the question. She wrote, "I want something that is mine. Not rented, not borrowed, not contingent on someone else's decision to sell or raise the price or change the terms." She looked at what she had written. She wrote below it, "I want ground that doesn't move." She looked at that. Then she wrote, "I have $18,000. What can $18,000 buy that doesn't move?" She closed the notebook and went to the computers and started searching. The research took 3 Sundays, not 3 Sundays of idle browsing, 3 Sundays of the kind of methodical, specific searching that she applied to all problems, starting broad and narrowing toward the actual answer, eliminating options as she understood why they did not fit, keeping the ones that remained. The first Sunday she looked at everything: land in rural Oregon, small cabins in the Coast Range, mobile homes in manufactured housing communities, recreational vehicles used as full-time housing, tiny houses on wheels. She read about all of it not to find a solution, but to understand the landscape of what existed, the way you survey the full territory before you start walking in a specific direction. The second Sunday she narrowed. Land in rural Oregon was possible but not practical. She needed to be in Troutdale or close to it. The warehouse job was the engine of the savings, and the engine needed to stay running. Anything that required more than 45 minutes of driving from Troutdale was going to cost her in time or gas or both in ways that would degrade the savings rate she had maintained for 18 months. Small cabins were possible on paper and not possible in practice. A habitable cabin within commuting range of Troutdale in a county that would allow her to live in it legally and that she could afford outright with $18,000 did not exist. She searched for 2 hours and confirmed that it did not exist. Mobile homes in manufactured housing communities were possible, but manufactured housing communities charged lot rent, and lot rent in the metro area had followed the same trajectory as apartment rent, and the lot rent on any communities she could find within range was between $400 and $700 a month, which was better than an apartment, but not what she was looking for. She was looking for something she could not be priced out of. That left vehicles, full-time vehicle dwelling. It was a category she had read about peripherally in the books she had found at the library over the previous year, but she had not spent time on it because she had not needed to yet. Now she needed to. She spent the second Sunday reading everything she could find about people who live full-time in recreational vehicles and trailers. Not the lifestyle blogs, the ones with the photographs of sunsets over desert landscapes and the affiliate links to camping gear. The actual practical accounts. The forums where people talked about what broke and how to fix it. The threads where full-timers discussed water hookups and electrical systems and the specific realities of sleeping in a vehicle through a Pacific Northwest winter. The third Sunday she looked at Airstreams. She had not planned to look specifically at Airstreams. She had planned to look at travel trailers generally, which was the category that covered the widest range of price points and made the most logical starting point. But the research kept circling back to Airstreams, specifically to older Airstreams, specifically to the ones built in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and the reason it kept circling back was a combination of factors that she recognized as the same combination she had been applying to every purchase decision since October of 2022. Build quality, repairability, resale value. and the specific relationship between purchase price and longevity that made something worth more per year of use than its sticker price suggested. Older Airstreams were built from aluminum shells over a welded frame, and the aluminum did not rust, and the frame could be repaired by someone with basic welding skills and patience. And the systems inside them, the plumbing and the electrical and the propane, were simple enough in design that a person of reasonable intelligence and access to YouTube could understand and repair them without professional help. This was not true of modern travel trailers, which were built from materials that degraded faster and were designed in ways that made owner repair difficult. She read about a 1991 Airstream 24 feet, the model called the Classic, which had been the mid-tier model in the Airstream line that year. Not the top end, but not the bottom, with a layout that included a real bed in the back, a small kitchen with a propane stove, a bathroom with a shower and a living area at the front that was modest and functional. She read about the specific issues that 1991 Classics typically developed after 30 years of sealant around the windows and the roof seams drying out and allowing water in the original plumbing fittings becoming brittle, the propane system requiring inspection and often partial replacement, the electrical system needing the original wiring assessed for safety. These were problems she understood how to research. They were the same kind of problems the unit had presented, just in a different category. Define the problem. Find the cheapest solution that actually works. Execute. She started looking at listings. The Airstream was in Gresham. She found it on a Thursday evening in the second week of May, 6 weeks after the notice on a classified listing that had been posted 3 weeks earlier and had not sold, which was a fact she noted with the same attention she gave to everything that told her something useful about a situation. A 1991 Airstream Classic, 24 feet, listed at $9,000, sitting in the driveway of a house on a residential street in Gresham, where it had been sitting according to the listing for just over 2 years. The listing was honest in the way that listings are honest when the seller has given up pretending. It said the trailer needed work. It listed the specific work: the roof seams needed resealing, 2 of the window seals had failed, the propane system needed inspection before use, and the fresh water tank had a crack that had been patched but might need replacement. The seller had bought it with the intention of restoring it and had restored approximately 40% of it before running out of the time and the motivation that restoration projects require in equal measure. Vera called the number in the listing on a Thursday evening, standing in the corridor outside unit number 14 with the armory quiet around her. The man who answered was named Dale. He was 61 years old, he said, and he had bought the Airstream when he retired early from his job at a paper mill in Camas, and the retirement had not gone as planned, and the Airstream had been sitting in his driveway since then while he figured out a new plan. He described the trailer's condition with the specific precision of a man who knows exactly what he has and exactly what it is worth, and has arrived at a price that reflects the reality of the situation rather than the fantasy of what he had hoped to get 2 years ago. She drove to Gresham on Saturday morning. The trailer sat in this driveway of a beige house on a quiet street, its aluminum shell dull from 2 years of Oregon weather, its nose cap stained with the particular pattern of water running from a roof seal that had been failing slowly and consistently. It looked from the outside exactly as the listing had described it: a project. A project in the middle of its middle stage, past the point of being someone else's clean problem, and not yet to the point of being a finished thing. Dale walked her through it for 40 minutes. He showed her the failed seals, the patched water tank, the propane system with its fittings that needed replacing. He showed her what he had already done, which was the interior walls relined in new paneling and the flooring replaced with vinyl plank that was water-resistant and correctly installed. He showed her the electrical system, which he had had inspected by a licensed electrician before the project stalled, and which was sound. She crawled under the trailer and looked at the frame. She had spent 2 Sundays watching videos about Airstream frames, and she knew what she was looking for. The frame was solid, no rust-through, no deformation, no evidence of a significant impact. The aluminum shell had surface oxidation that was cosmetic and addressable. She stood up and brushed the gravel off her knees. She said, "I'll give you $8,500. Dale looked at her for a moment. He said that was lower than he had hoped. She said she understood. She said she was paying cash and she could take it today. He said, "Give him a minute." He went inside. He came back out. He said, "Okay." She drove back to the armory with the title and the canvas bag on the passenger seat and sat in the parking lot for a while. $8,500. She had done the math before she made the offer. After the purchase, she would have $9,500 remaining. The repairs she had researched would cost somewhere between $2,500 and $4,000 if she did them herself, buying parts and doing the labor on weekends. Call it $3,500 to be conservative. That left $6,000 in the account, plus 2 months of savings at the reduced rate given the contributions to Eugene that were still running. She would leave the armory with somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000 in savings, a paid-off trailer, and a place to park it. The parking was the thing she had not yet solved. She could not park the Airstream on a public street and live in it legally in Portland. She knew this. The regulations around vehicle dwelling in the city had changed in the years before she arrived, and the rules were neither permissive nor consistently enforced, which meant they were unpredictable. And unpredictable was not a condition she was willing to build a housing situation on. She needed a private lot, a piece of land where she could park legally with access to utilities within a distance of Troutdale that the Civic could cover in reasonable time. She had been thinking about this problem for 3 weeks without a solution, when the solution appeared in the way solutions sometimes appear when you have spent enough time in a place that you know all the people in it without having tried to know them. Her name was Greta Volka. She was 67 years old and she had been renting unit number 22 at the Multnomah Armory Self-Storage for 4 years, which predated Vera by 2.5 years and made her one of the longer-term tenants in the building. She was a retired school teacher, first and second grade, 31 years in the Portland public school system, and she had the posture and the measured pace of someone who had spent 3 decades managing rooms full of small children and had learned to conserve energy in the particular way that teaching requires. Vera and Greta had been nodding at each other in the corridor for 18 months. That was the complete extent of their relationship. The armory was not a social environment. People came, they accessed their units, they left. If they exchanged words, the words were usually about the parking situation in the small lot out front, or the broken vending machine, or the question of whether the elevator worked, which it did not. But people kept pressing the button anyway. Greta was different in one specific way from the other tenants Vera had observed over 18 months. She came to her unit on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, consistently always between 8 and 9, always for no longer than an hour. She arrived with empty canvas bags and left with full ones, which told Vera she was rotating things through her unit systematically, bringing things in and taking things out on a schedule that suggested she was doing something deliberate with the space rather than simply storing objects she had not yet decided what to do with. Vera had never asked about it. It was not her business, and the armory was not a place where people asked about things. It was the 4th Sunday after the notice when Greta stopped in the corridor outside unit number 14. Vera was in the parking lot that afternoon with a YouTube video open on her phone and a diagram printed from a website about Airstream roof seal repair spread on the hood of the Civic, planning the first phase of the work. She had driven the Airstream from Gresham 2 weeks earlier and parked it in the corner of the facility's lot that the manager had allocated her after she explained that she needed a space for a vehicle she was working on and offered an extra $40 a month for the inconvenience, which the manager had accepted without asking additional questions. The $40 was worth it. The trailer in the lot meant she could work on it on weekends without driving to Gresham, and the proximity of the work to her living space meant that she could carry what she learned in the evenings into the work the following morning. Greta walked to the edge of the lot and looked at the Airstream. She said, "Is that yours?" Vera said, "Working on it." Greta looked at the trailer for a moment. She said she had land out in Troutdale, a small parcel about half an acre. She had inherited it from her sister, who had bought it in the 1970s with the intention of building a workshop and had never built the workshop. She had been paying $12 a year in property tax on it and doing nothing else with it for 6 years. She said, "If you need somewhere to park that when you are done with it, I would do $275 a month. Full hookup, water and electric." She said it the way she said everything, which was in the measured, undecorated way of a person who has said 10,000 things to small children over 31 years and has learned that the direct version is always the most useful. Vera looked at her. She said, "Why are you offering me this?" Greta looked at the armory building. She looked at the towers. She had been coming to this building for 4 years, and she had thought about it, The way you think about things you see, often without urgency, in the peripheral way, without forcing it. She said, because this building is about to become something expensive, and you are not. She turned and walked back toward the entrance. That was the entire conversation. Vera stood in the parking lot with the diagram on the hood of the Civic and thought about the conversation for a long time. $275 a month. Water and electric. Troutdale, which was 14 miles from the warehouse, and a drive she made every day already. The land would cost her less per month than the unit had cost her per month, and it would include utilities, and it would be a private parcel with a private arrangement that did not depend on a corporate decision to sell to a developer. She did not say yes to Greta that day. She went back to the trailer and looked at the diagram and thought about what saying yes would mean, which was not only the practical resolution of the parking problem, but something larger and harder to name. Saying yes meant she was not going back. She had known that already. But knowing a thing and saying yes to its specific form are two different versions of knowing. She let it sit for a week. The sixth Sunday after the notice, Vera went to the library and sat in her chair and opened her phone. She had a reason to be there that Sunday, beyond the usual reason. She was going to look at apartment listings. She was going to do the search she had been putting off for 6 weeks, the one she had been constructing arguments against without having done it yet, because she understood that the arguments against a thing you have not yet actually confronted are provisional. You have to look at the thing before your rejection of it means anything. She searched for available rentals in Portland, studios and rooms in shared houses within 45 minutes of Troutdale. The parameters of the search were essentially the same as the parameters she had run in a grocery store parking lot 2.5 years ago when she was 21 years old and the numbers had not worked. The numbers still did not work in the sense that she had always understood them. The cheapest studio she found was $1,380 a month in a complex off-Powell with photographs that showed a kitchen the size of a large closet and windows that faced another building. The more realistic range for something she could actually live in without it being a daily exercise. In tolerating the inadequate was between $1,400 and $1,600 a month. She had enough for a deposit. She had enough for first and last. She had enough to walk into a leasing office this week and sign a document and have a legal address and a door with a deadbolt and a bathroom that was hers and a kitchen with a real stove. She sat with that for a moment. She let it be real. A legal address, a deadbolt, a bathroom. She had gone without these things for 26 months. She had built a system that compensated for their absence, and the system had worked, but the absence was still an absence. And she was not going to pretend it had not cost her something, because pretending things have not cost you something is a way of not learning from what they cost. So she sat with it. The idea of a real apartment, the idea of what normal looked like from the outside of it. And then she did the other calculation. $1,400 a month. Her take-home was $2,100. $1,400 in rent left her $700 for everything else: car insurance, gas, food, phone, the small costs that accumulated into the real cost of being alive. $700 for everything except rent meant she was spending every dollar that came in and saving nothing. Not nothing as a rate, nothing as a literal figure. Zero accumulation. The same position she had been in when she was 21 years old in that grocery store parking lot, except with a lease attached to it. She looked at the listings for a while longer. She looked at the photographs of the kitchen the size of a closet and the windows that faced another building. She thought about what it would mean to move into one of these apartments and pay $1,400 a month and save nothing and be exactly where she had been at 21 except 2 years older. And then she thought about something else. She thought about what she would be paying $1,400 a month for. Not the kitchen, not the deadbolt. Those were incidental. She would be paying $1,400 a month to be inside the system. The system that had priced her out when she arrived. The system that had looked at her warehouse income and her lack of deposit and her lack of rental history and had said no. The system that was at this moment in the process of converting the building that had held her for 26 months into boutique luxury lofts starting at $2,800 a month. She was being invited back into the system. The system was offering her a closet kitchen and a $1,400 monthly payment and the status of being a normal renter in a normal city. She sat in the library chair and she felt something clarify in a way that things clarify when you have been circling a truth for long enough and finally sit still enough to see it. She did not want back in. Not because the system was beneath her, not because she had some ideology about alternative housing or some principle she was committed to defending. Simply because the math of going back in was exactly the same math she had rejected in February of 2023 when she had sat in the parking lot at the warehouse and written in her notebook, "I could leave. I am choosing not to." She had chosen not to then because staying was the right choice. Going back into a standard apartment now was not the right choice. Not because the apartments were bad, because she had spent 26 months building something that an apartment lease would immediately begin to dismantle. The savings rate, the accumulation, the ground. The system would give her a kitchen and take the ground. She was not trading the ground for a kitchen. She closed the apartment listings on her phone. She opened her messages and she wrote to Greta Volka, whose number she had gotten from the facility's tenant directory the previous week. Still interested in the Troutdale arrangement if the offer stands. Greta replied in 4 minutes. It stands. Come by next week and I'll show you the parcel. Vera put the phone in her pocket. She sat in the library for another hour. She did not read anything. She looked out the window at the April rain on the street, and she thought about the shape of what she was choosing, which was not what anyone around her would recognize as normal, and was not what she had imagined for herself at 21, and was as far as she could determine exactly right. She visited the Troutdale parcel on a Wednesday afternoon when the warehouse let her out at 2. It was half an acre on a gravel road off of a county road that connected to the highway corridor she drove every day. Not beautiful exactly. An open parcel with a stand of Douglas firs along the back edge, and a graveled area near the road where a structure had apparently once stood, leaving behind a concrete pad and 2 hookup posts, one for water, one for electrical. The concrete pad was cracked but sound. The hookups had been inactive, but were connected to the county water line and the rural electrical grid, both of which Greta confirmed were live and billable to whoever occupied the parcel. Vera stood on the concrete pad and looked at the Douglas firs. She looked at the sky above them, which was the particular wide Oregon sky that you lose in the city and regain the moment you are east of it. She looked at the 2 hookup posts, the most important things on the parcel, because what they represented was a floor. She would not be wild camping. She would have water coming in and electricity coming in and a legal arrangement with the landowner, and the combination of those things made the arrangement as stable as anything she had occupied since she was 18 years old. $275 a month. That was the only cost. The Airstream was already paid for. The hookup fees would go into the monthly bill, but the base payment to Greta for use of the parcel was $275. She had been spending $419 a month in the Armory. She was about to spend $275 plus utilities, which would run somewhere between $50 and $100 a month depending on the season. Call it $375 total, less than the Armory. She shook hands with Greta in the gravel driveway on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, and the handshake was the full extent of the formal process, because Greta was the kind of person who understood that some arrangements were better made between people who understood each other than between lawyers. She drove back to the Armory with 43 days left on the notice. The repairs took every weekend from the first Saturday in May through the end of June. She had organized them in the same way she had organized every problem in the unit in order of severity, addressing the most structurally significant issues first and moving outward from there. The roof seals were first. She watched 8 hours of video about Airstream roof reseal procedures over 2 evenings in the unit, making notes in the notebook with the same attention she had applied to every notebook entry for 26 months. She bought the materials on a Friday and spent all of Saturday on top of the trailer in the facility's parking lot, with a brush and a bucket in the specific self-possessed focus of a person who is doing something for the first time and is not in a hurry to do it wrong. The window seals were next, then the water tank, which the patch that Dale had applied held well enough that she determined replacement was not necessary yet, and she would monitor it and replace it when the patch failed rather than replacing it preemptively. The propane system she had inspected by a technician from a company in Gresham that serviced RVs, because the propane system was the one category of repair where the consequences of being wrong were large enough that she was not willing to depend entirely on YouTube and the inspection cost her $65 and confirmed that the lines were intact and the fittings needed replacing, which she then did herself with the technician's diagram in 4 hours and $22 in parts. The electrical she left alone. It had already been inspected and it was sound. The interior she worked on in evenings after she returned from the unit, sitting in the Airstream in the parking lot with the LED panels she had moved temporarily from the unit, working by their flat light on the things that could be done in short increments. She recaulked the bathroom fixtures. She replaced the water heater and rod. She serviced the furnace with a cleaning kit that cost $12 and took 40 minutes. She cleaned the roof vents and replaced their screens. She touched up the interior panel seams where the previous owner had let them gap. It was the same process it had always been, smaller, more contained. The Airstream was a problem set that fit inside a 24-foot aluminum shell, and she worked her way through it the way she had worked her way through the unit one issue at a time, in order without expecting any single fix to transform the whole, and without underestimating the cumulative effect of fixing everything that could be fixed. By the end of June, 6 weeks in the Airstream held. The roof did not leak in the June rain. The water system ran clean. The propane stove ignited. The furnace ran. She stood in the front area of the trailer on a Saturday afternoon in late June, with the windows open and the Douglas fir smell of the Troutdale parcel arriving in her imagination. And she looked at what she had made, which was not a renovation, not a transformation, but a repaired thing, a working thing. A thing that could hold her the way the armory unit had held her, but with running water and heat that came from a thermostat and a stove that did not require a trip to the warehouse break room. She had 6 days left on the notice. She did not pack exactly because she had never unpacked exactly. The armory had taught her that everything you own has a specific place, and that the specific place is the organizational unit of a small space. And she had maintained that discipline for 26 months. And there was nothing in unit number 14 that was not already in its correct place, which meant moving, it meant taking it from its correct place and putting it in the Airstream. And the transfer was less a move than a relocation of a system that was already organized. She did it over 3 evenings. The clothes from the shelf, the books from the plastic bin, the power strip and the cords and the LED panels, the heated mattress pad and its battery pack, the small cooler, the notebook, the thermometer. The pothos she moved last on the final evening, carrying it carefully because it had grown over 26 months into something that required 2 hands in a particular angle to get through a door, its vines trailing, and its leaves the deep, improbable green of a plant that has survived conditions it was not designed for and has decided without any evidence of deliberation to thrive anyway. She set it on the shelf in the Airstream that ran along the window above the kitchen area. The window let in actual daylight, the real kind, not the gap under a roll door kind, and the pothos registered this immediately and visibly, the way living things register what they have been missing. She swept the unit. She did this because it was the right thing to do, not because anyone would notice or care. Because leaving a space clean when you leave it is a way of acknowledging that the space had value and that you were a person who understood that. She swept from the back wall to the door. The concrete floor was cold the way it had always been cold. The stone back wall was cold the way it had always been cold. The vault overhead was the same vault it had been on the October night when she had sat on a mattress in a hoodie and looked up into the dark and heard nothing for the first time in months. She leaned the broom against the wall and stood in the middle of the empty space. It looked empty, exactly like what it had always been. A 12-foot by 15-foot stone room in an 1891 building, vaulted ceiling, concrete floor, 3 drywall walls, and 1 granite wall, and a roll-up metal door. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would photograph well or describe well or justify to anyone who had not been in this room why it mattered. She walked to the granite wall and put her hand on it one more time. Cold, heavy, indifferent. Exactly itself. She looked at the 2 push pins in the drywall to the right of the granite wall. She had put the coastline photograph there in her 3rd month, pressed a push pin through the corner and into the drywall with the heel of her palm, and the push pin had been in the same place for 23 months. Beside it, the photograph of Sammy, which she had added in month 6, another push pin, same method. She pulled the push pins out. The photographs came with them. She held them both. Sammy at 12, photographed at Carol's house in Eugene, On Thanksgiving of the previous year, standing in front of a door with the self-conscious, slightly too straight posture of a teenager who knows a camera is present. The coastline photograph, the Oregon coast taken by her mother on a trip they had taken together when Vera was 14 8 years ago, before the various dispersions of the family had made trips together, a thing that required planning instead of just a thing that happened. She had looked at those photographs in this room for 23 months and 26 months, respectively. She had looked at them on the nights when the thing she was doing felt impossible, and on the nights when it felt like the only thing that made sense, and on all the ordinary nights in between, which were most of the nights, because extraordinary nights are the exception, and ordinary nights are what a life is actually made of. She folded the coastline photograph once and put it in the pocket of her jacket. She held the photograph of Sammy. She looked at the two small holes in the drywall where the push pins had been. The holes were small, barely visible the width of a pin. They would disappear under paint when the renovation crew came in. Everything in this room would disappear when the renovation crew came in, the four drywall walls in the concrete floor, and the particular quality of the silence, all of it would be replaced with whatever a boutique luxury loft required, which was presumably something that did not look anything like this. She was still holding the photograph of Sammy and the pushpins when she thought about what she was going to do next. She had not planned it. It arrived the way things arrive when you are standing still in a place that has held you for 26 months and you are about to leave it for the last time, and your hands are doing something, and your mind has the particular quality of alertness that comes from significance without ceremony. She put the photographs and the pushpins in her jacket pocket. She took the notebook from the canvas bag and tore a page from the back. She found the pens she always kept in the front pocket of the bag. She pressed the page against the granite wall using the stone as a writing surface, and she wrote. She did not write slowly, and she did not write with deliberation. She wrote the way you write when you know what you mean, and you just need to get it outside of your own head. She wrote, "This place held me for 26 months. I came here with nothing, and I left with enough. I don't know who you are, or why you're here, or what you're carrying. But this building is 133 years old, and it has held harder things than whatever this is. It will hold you too. You are going to be okay." She did not sign it. She looked at the granite wall. She ran her hand along the lower course of stone where the blocks met the concrete floor, looking for the particular place she had noticed months ago. A gap between two of the original granite blocks, where the mortar had cracked and receded, leaving a vertical seam perhaps half an inch wide and 3 inches deep, too small to see unless you were looking at the base of the wall from a foot away. She folded the paper once. She pressed it into the seam until it was flush with the wall surface. You could not see it. You could not find it unless you were running your hand along the base of the wall, looking for exactly that kind of gap, which was not something a renovation crew would do and was not something a casual observer would do. But a person who was living in this room, a person who was sitting on a mattress at floor level and looking at the wall from close up, the way you look at walls when there is nothing else to look at, might find it. Might find it the way she had found the outlet behind the extension cord in her second week by accident, and by proximity, and by the specific quality of attention that you develop when a small space becomes the whole of your world. Nobody had asked her to write the note. Nobody would ever know she had written it. Nobody could confirm it would be found by the right person, or found by a person who needed it, or found at all before the renovation crew took the drywall down and reached the stone. That was the point, not the outcome, the act. She had been a person who needed a note and had not found one. She was leaving as a person who could write one, and she was writing it not because it would change anything she could see or measure, but because it was the true thing to do. And she had learned in 26 months that doing the true thing in the absence of any audience is the only version of doing the true thing that counts. She stood up. She picked up the canvas bag and the broom which she was taking because it was a good broom and she would need it in the airstream. She walked to the roll-up door and ducked under it and stood in the corridor. She reached up and pulled the door down. It descended with a familiar rattle and met the concrete floor with a familiar metallic contact sound, the same sound she had heard at the end of every evening for 26 months, the sound of the day concluding in the only space that was completely and entirely her own. She turned the key in the lock for the last time. She walked down the corridor, past the vending machine, past the initials carved into the stone. She did not stop or look back. She returned the key card at the office the next morning. The Airstream arrived on Greta's parcel on a Tuesday in early July, 7 days after the notice expired. Vera drove the Civic and towed the trailer on borrowed hitch hardware from a co-worker at the warehouse who owned a truck and had offered the loan without being asked for a reason. The gravel road was narrow and the backing maneuver onto the concrete pad took 4 attempts in 40 minutes, but it was accomplished and the trailer sat on the pad with a solidity that the cracked concrete accommodated without complaint. She hooked up the water and the electrical that afternoon. The water ran clean from the first flush. The electrical powered everything she asked it to power. The furnace ignited on the first try. She stood in the Airstream on a Tuesday evening in July, with the windows open and the Douglas firs at the back of the parcel visible through the rear window, and she cooked a meal on the propane stove, eggs and potatoes from the grocery store. Nothing elaborate, the kind of meal she had been assembling cold in the armor unit for 26 months and had been imagining assembling on an actual stove for all of those same months. The stove worked. The pan heated evenly. The eggs cooked. She ate standing at the counter because the dinette was not yet arranged. She looked at the rear window and the firs and thought about nothing in particular, which was a kind of thinking she had not had access to for a long time. The thinking that happens when the immediate problems are solved and the space opens up for something else. She unpacked the photographs that evening. The coastline, the Oregon coast, the photograph her mother had taken 8 years ago. She found a push pin in the bottom of the canvas bag, the same push pin she had used in the unit which she had taken out of the drywall with the photographs and dropped into the bag pocket without thinking. She pressed it through the corner of the coastline photograph and into the Airstream's interior paneling on the wall beside the rear window. The push pin went in easily. The paneling was soft compared to drywall. She pressed it the rest of the way with her thumb. The photograph hung on the wall of the Airstream the way it had hung on the wall of unit number 14. The corner slightly curled from where the push pin had held it for 23 months. The same small hole in the corner that every previous push pin had made. She stepped back and looked at it. The coastline in the photograph was gray and wide, the Pacific on an overcast day in October. The kind of day that most people from outside Oregon think of as bad weather, and that people who live in Oregon understand as simply weather, the real kind, the kind the coast looks like most of the time, and which is not less beautiful for being ordinary. She had been looking at that photograph for 23 months in a stone room with no windows. She was now looking at it in a space with actual windows, with actual daylight, with actual firs visible outside. And the photograph was the same photograph, but the context around it had changed entirely, and the change made the image different in a way she could not describe except to say that it was possible now to look at it without the looking being a form of longing. She could look at it as what it was, a photograph of a place she intended to go. She put the photograph of Sammy on the wall beside it. Same push pin, different paneling, same slight diagonal that the push pin always took when she pressed it with her thumb rather than a tool. She stood back. Both photographs. New wall, same photographs. She was 23 years old in 11 months. She would be 24 in 6 weeks. She had no debt. She had an Airstream that she owned outright and a place to park it for $275 a month and $9,200 in a bank account, and no one in the world to whom she owed anything she had not already paid. That was the total of what 26 months in a granite armory building had produced. Not triumph, not transformation, a foundation. The kind that is built from the bottom up in the small increments, each one resting on the last, until one day you are standing on something that does not move. The warehouse parking lot in late August was where Darcy Pruitt asked the question. Darcy had been on the loading team for 2 years, which meant she had been at the same warehouse as Vera for the last 18 months of the Armory period, in the current 2 months of the Airstream period. And in that time, she had observed Vera with the specific attention of someone who is trying to understand a discrepancy. The discrepancy was this: everyone at the warehouse experienced some version of financial stress. It was a warehouse job in the Portland metro area in a period when the distance between wages and housing costs had become the dominant fact of most of their financial lives. The stress expressed itself in different ways for different people, but it was present a low background frequency in every conversation about weekends and bills and the end of the month. Vera did not have it. She had not had it in 2 years of working alongside people who did. She did not complain about rent the way other people complained about rent. She did not talk about her apartment. She did not express the specific fatigue of a person who is working to pay for a place to live and finding the equation perpetually insufficient. She looked Darcy had said to someone else like, she slept okay. On a Thursday in late August, Darcy walked past the Civic in the parking lot and stopped and said, "Can I ask you something?" Vera said yes. Darcy said, "Where do you live?" There was a pause, not a long pause. The length of a breath, the kind of pause you take when you are deciding how much of the truth to tell and concluding that the full version is the only one that does what it needs to do. Vera told her, not the abbreviated version, the actual version, because she had told enough abbreviated versions over the past 2 years, told her mother she was at her place, told co-workers she lived northeast, told anyone who asked that she had something figured out, and the abbreviated versions had served their purpose, and the purpose was now complete. She told Darcy about unit number 14 in the $89 a month, in the foam mat, in the heated mattress pad, in the $67 it had cost, in the LED panels in rotation, in the Planet Fitness membership, in the mail service on Burnside, in the kale she ate direct from the can, in the library on Sundays, in the pothos that had grown across the length of the top shelf. She told her about the $18,000 at month 18, and the notice on the same day, in the 90 days in Greta Volk in the parking lot with a half-acre and 2 hookup posts. She told her about the 1991 Airstream in Dale's driveway in Gresham and the $8,500 and the 6 weeks of weekend repairs and the propane stove that had worked on the first try. Darcy listened to all of it without saying anything. When Vera finished, Darcy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Vera." Vera said, "I know." Darcy said, "You saved $18,000. Vera said, "I did." Darcy said, "In a storage unit." Vera said, "In an armory." She said it with a small precision because there was a difference, and the difference had mattered for 26 months, and she was not going to stop making it now. Darcy told someone. The someone told someone else. The way information travels in a workplace is not identical to the way it travels online, but the basic mechanics are the same. Something true that is also surprising has velocity, and the truth of Vera's situation and its surprising elements were both present and both sufficient. She did not seek out the conversations. She did not turn down the ones that found her. She told the true version each time, including the parts that were uncomfortable, including the twice she had been genuinely sick, including the cousin's wedding she had not gone to because she did not know how to explain where she lived, including the evening she had come home from a 10-hour shift and rolled up the metal door and sat on the mattress in the dark and felt the full weight of what her life looked like from the outside. She told that part because it was part of it, because a version of the story that left out the 38-degree nights and the holidays spent alone in a stone room would be a version constructed for a specific effect, and she had not built anything in 26 months for effect. She had built it because it was what the situation required, and because it worked, and the only honest account of it was the complete one. She drives past the armory sometimes, not on purpose. The route between Troutdale and certain parts of northeast Portland passes within 3 blocks of it, and she takes that route when she has reason to be in that part of the city, which is occasionally. She does not go out of her way to see it, and she does not avoid it. The scaffolding went up in September. By October, it covered both towers, the gray granite, invisible behind the green construction mesh that developers use to contain debris and present a uniform appearance while the work inside goes forward. The sign at the corner had changed. Where the small sign had read, Multnomah Armory, self-storage units from $79 per month, there was now a larger sign, high quality, printed on weatherproof board, Meridian Armory Residences. Boutique luxury loft, living in a historic landmark. Leasing begins spring 2025, starting from $2,800 per month. She looked at the sign through the windshield once, and then did not look at it again. Not from bitterness. She did not feel bitter about it. She felt about it the way she felt about most things she could not change and had not tried to change, which was a kind of clear-eyed neutrality that was not the same as indifference, but that required the same stillness. The armory had held her. It was going to hold someone else now in a different capacity, at a different price for a different kind of person. The stone was the same stone. The vault was the same vault. Whatever boutique luxury loft they built inside those walls would still be held up by granite cut from the Columbia Gorge in 1891, and the people who paid $2,800 a month would be sleeping under the same arches and inside the same 3-foot thick walls that had kept her dry and held her quiet for 26 months. And they would never know that because that was not the kind of thing that shows up in a leasing brochure. She had tried the gate code once 3 months after she left. She had driven past on a Tuesday evening in October and stopped and got out of the Civic and walked to the iron gate and punched in the code from memory, the 6 digits she had entered several hundred times over 26 months. The gate had unlocked. She had stood there with one hand on the iron and looked through it at the corridor leading to the units in the darkness at the end of it. She had stood there long enough that the gate would have closed again if she had not held it. She did not go in. She stepped back and let the gate close and walked back to the Civic and drove to Troutdale. She had not needed to go in. The code worked, and the building was the same building, and unit number 14 was still a unit numbered 14, presumably still containing whatever someone had put in it after she cleared out her own things. None of that required her presence. She had not gone back to retrieve something or to confirm something. She had gone back because leaving something completely is a process, and the process has steps, and standing at the gate with the code punched in and choosing not to enter was one of the steps. She was done with the steps now. Sammy called on a Wednesday evening in November. He was 15 by then. He had been at Carol's house in Eugene for 13 months, and the arrangement had settled into the kind of arrangement that works when the people involved are willing to let it work, which Carol was and Sammy was, and Vera had been contributing to financially since the month she set it up. The contributions had continued through the Armory period and had not stopped when she moved into the Airstream because the math still allowed them and the reason for them had not changed. He called to tell her about a project he had done at school. Art class. He had been asked to draw a place that mattered to him, and he had drawn the Armory, the exterior from the front, with the 2 towers and the Gothic arch details and the iron gate and the small sign beside it. He had drawn it from memory. She asked him how it had gone. He said the teacher had asked if it was a castle. He said he had said no. It's a storage place. My sister used to live there. The teacher had asked him to explain. He said he had explained. She sat in the Airstream with the propane heater running and the rain on the aluminum roof and the Douglas firs visible in the dark outside the rear window, and she listened to her 15-year-old brother explain what he had told a class of high school students about the place where his sister had lived for 26 months. And the explanation as he delivered it was accurate in every particular and was also somehow larger than the particulars, the way the truth of something is often larger than its facts. When he finished, she said, "How'd they take it?" He said they thought it was pretty cool. She said it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you going to come get me sometime? Like go somewhere?" She said, "That's the plan." He said, "Where?" She thought about this coastline photograph on the Airstream wall. The same gray Pacific, the same overcast October day, the same Oregon coast that her mother had photographed from a beach access road when Vera was 14 and Sammy was 5, and the family had still been in the configuration it had been in before the various departures began. She said, "The coast. I've got a photograph I want to show you in person." He said, "When?" She said, "When the weather is right. Spring, probably." He said, "Okay." He said goodnight. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her lap and listened to the rain on the roof. Not a storage unit roof, a thin metal roll-up door over a stone vault. An aluminum roof curved in the distinctive shape that Airstream had been building since the 1930s, designed to shed water and flex slightly with temperature change and last for decades beyond the expected lifespan of almost any other housing material. The rain hit it the way rain hits aluminum, which is with a sound that is not quite like any other sound. A soft, continuous percussion that is somehow both present and soothing, the way a sound can be when you are inside the thing. It is raining on, and the inside is warm and holds you. She looked at the coastline photograph, the pushpin in the corner, The same pushpin. The small hole from all the previous walls it had been pressed through accumulated over 8 years in the corner of a photograph her mother had taken with a disposable camera on a beach access road in October. She was going to take Sammy to that beach. Not as an event, not as a closure or a celebration or a marker of anything specific. Just as a thing you do when you have the time and the money and the reason which she had all three of now and which she had not had at any of the other times she might have wanted to do it. She had ground, the kind that does not move. It had taken 26 months and $89 a month, and every problem solved in sequence cold before light, before shower, before address, before savings, before plan. And it had cost her things she would not pretend. It had not cost, but it had produced what it had produced, and what it had produced was enough to stand on. She turned off the light in the airstream. The Douglas firs disappeared into the dark outside the window. The rain continued on the aluminum roof, steady and patient, and without any opinion about what was happening inside. She lay back. She was 24 years old.